All right, I think we can go ahead and start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bridge Your Tech Talent Gap with the Power of the Human Cloud webinar. My name is Przemek Bernard. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Talent Alpha, and I'll be your host today. But before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping points that I'd like to cover very quickly with you. Please be aware that we are recording today's webinar. You will also receive the link to the recording soon. And do feel to share this with your colleagues and clients. If you'd like to ask any questions to the panelists during the webinar, there is a QA box function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please use that. We'll be taking the questions as we come along, and hopefully we'll be able to cover them throughout the session. We'll do our best to answer your questions live, but also there will be a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the webinar to make sure we can cover all of your points. So without further ado, let's get this rolling. Let me introduce my panelists today, who were kind enough to accept our invitation to share their experience with the Human Cloud. Carlos Dubal, who is the advisor at the EIT Digital. EIT Digital is the pan-European accelerator, helping startups and scale-ups to access the European market, a program that is supported actually by the European Commission. Us as Talent Alpha, we have a privilege working with EIT, and we've had a great experience so far, and I'm looking forward to Carlos's presentation today. Carlos, thank you for joining us, as well as Barry Matthews, founder and the managing director of Resource, a consulting firm that is helping companies and businesses embrace the human cloud. So if you want to get some hands-on help into implementing what we are going to talk about today, Barry is your man. So there are a number of points that we'll be covering today. First, we will talk about actually the issue at hand, which is, what is happening with the tech talent landscape and why companies need to consider new solutions to actually close that gap. And that would be the part that Carlos will take forward. Then we'll shift to Barry, who will explain to us what actually open talent economy is and what human cloud means and how we can embrace it within your enterprises. And then I will take over and show you how actually some of that works in practice. An example from the IT world that Talent Alpha has a privilege to promote. And then, as again, we'll be closing with an Q&A section. So let me pass control to Carlos, and we can take that away. Carlos, over to you. Oh, you're muted. Hold on.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Przemek. Thank you, Talent Alpha, for this invitation. Happy to be part of this event. I want to do just a quick overview and introduction about the widening talent gap that I think everybody knows about. The fact that organizations face the challenge of making sure that they onboard the talent they need to keep up with the times, and how that drives the need for new ways of thinking about how to solve that and how to manage the workforce. So there you go. So I want to start quickly about the environment. A lot of you probably know this framework, the VUCA framework, VUCA, that was first designed by the military many years ago, and that's been applied to the business world more recently. That looks at the environment and how volatile, how uncertain, how complex, how ambiguous that environment is or is going to be. You all know that it's all going up on all counts. There are many reasons for that, from the convergence of different disrupting exponential technologies to the changes in people's behavior, the rise of social networks, the democratization of access to resources and capital for many players that are disrupting industries. Lately, the Black Swan event that COVID-19 pandemic has been. So all these things are making the environment increasingly complex for companies and organizations to navigate. That has implications for companies and organizations that want to stay ahead of this situation. It sets new priorities, starting with the ability to develop an ability to learn and adapt, to do that quickly and often. And terms are coined like agility, like flexibility, like resilience. And organizations need to learn and understand how to embrace uncertainty and risk, letting go of traditional ways of doing things and of making decisions. And they need to start moving away from the traditional planning cycles and thinking more about testing and executing and trying to learn from outcomes, trying to predict outcomes in a very uncertain world. This means they need to learn how to collaborate, share, and receive knowledge both internally and with external agents, very importantly. And that means they need to expand their networks and start thinking about managing ecosystems. They still need to identify, develop, and recruit the best talent, but now the skills they need to recruit for are more complex, more difficult to actually gauge and identify. And they still need to think about the social and cognitive abilities, the soft skills of these people, because these are people that need to be able to work in teams and to learn. Overall, the human factor is increasingly and more importantly the key to all this equation. So organizations are forced to start thinking about, their traditional way of thinking about managing a workforce to actually managing a workforce ecosystem, okay? And that brings some new concepts and complexities to the fore. There's a study that has been very recently published by the MIT Sloan Management Review together with Deloitte about the future of the workforce. It is a global study where they've polled about 5,000 people. And there's a couple of insights that I wanted to share that I think are very illustrative. On the left-hand side, about 87% of the people responding to this survey already believe that external contributors are part of the workforces in their organizations. So there's already a belief, and a vast majority of people that there are external contributors that can be considered part of the workforce of the company. And on the right-hand side, although, about a third of these respondents believe that over the next couple of years, they're going to grow their internal employee bases, a bigger percentage of that, from 40 to 70%, believe that other external agents are also going to be very important contributors to the workforce, from contractors, service providers, external contributors, and developers and accessory providers, and obviously including as well the RPA and the technology as another part of the workforce, the bots, right? So in this study, they have proposed a definition of what a workforce ecosystem could be. And that could be a structure that's focused on creating value for organization, including actors from both within the organization and beyond that are working to pursue both individual and collective goals. But very importantly, they're working both in a complementary way. So these are organizations or workers inside and outside that are working to serve mutual customers and offer value, but they're working independently in a complementary way. And they're still interdependent. So they still share success or failure, and they're win or lose together. So they need to work together. What are the drivers of this workforce ecosystem? Okay, at the end of the day, there are three main drivers that are making this trend happen. Number one, the changing nature of work. A lot of organizations are going from a process-based way of managing jobs to the way many consulting firms, software development houses, et cetera, have been working for many years, which is team and project-based. And you have a lot of people now working rather in multiple teams and multiple projects rather than in specific roles. That drives a higher focus on speed, on agility, on innovation and innovative ways of working, and relationships inside and outside the organization. And plus, COVID-19 has fueled a trend that already existed towards remote and hybrid work. It has lowered the barriers and a lot of misconceptions or preconceptions that existed with regards to teams working, being able to be productive while they're not exactly working in the same space, and people being able to actually perform in different locations and working from different places. A second main driver is the actual shift in worker preferences. So workers are thinking more about, are giving more credence to purpose, flexibility, personalized experiences over job stability and security. And they're looking for career currency through experiences and gigs and growing their skills and capabilities through these gigs rather than roles and positions, okay? And last but not least, we have enabling technologies, and these are technologies that have, from talent management systems that sometimes are heavily based on analytics, even machine learning, that allow organizations to apply those to different processes, whether it's recruiting, staffing, assessment of people. Obviously those are changing the game and enabling this ecosystem concept. Then online talent marketplaces and platforms, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that later in the presentation. These are making access to resources and talent outside the organizations scalable and ready. And then technology as such, RPA is enabling the fact that technology is becoming part of the workforce itself. So overall, organizations have homework to do. I mean, at the end of the day, about a third of the participants in this survey basically thought that within the next 24 months, external participants will be a part of the equation. Half of them are using online platforms already and believe they will use them even more, but only 28% believe that the organization is ready to manage this change. And just to finish this introduction and this presentation, just want to give you a sense of how big this gap is. If we look at this estimate by Microsoft about digital jobs, they estimate that by 2025 there will be 150 million approximately new jobs that have to be created, about 2/3 of those in software development, the rest in data analysis, cloud, cybersecurity. Huge. Obviously, each organization, to cover its own share of this gap, it's probably not very reasonable to think that they're going to be able to do it through traditional recruiting and internal workforce and methodologies. They will have to rely on ecosystems. There's no doubt about that. That's what I wanted to cover.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions on the back of that. One is, as you and your team speak to those enterprises, do you feel like the priorities shifted kind of in this, let's say, once the aftershock of the COVID-19 passed, which is what I think happened kind of about a year ago between March and June? Now, do you see that they are focused on some other kind of priorities within the organization? And if so, how important is what we are discussing on their priority list?
I think the common denominator that we're seeing is the COVID-19 has eliminated a lot of preconceptions that existed about the fact that teams cannot be productive in a hybrid mode or in working in remote locations. So that's enabled. There were already a lot of efforts going towards developing, let's say, methodologies such as Agile and other methodologies for internal teams to work together in a different way. But now they've realized also that that's not going to be enough, that they need to actually think about how to engage with other stakeholders, with other external organizations. And the only way to do that is through some sort of platform or technology. I think there's an increased heightened sense of urgency and need to do that. There's not a great visibility over what the solutions are, and there needs to be some education about that to a lot of these organizations.
I think it's a great segue to my next question. So as part of the mission of the EIT is to present startups and scale-ups to the enterprises, do you see more inclination and kind of more eagerness to actually consider, like this new emerging technologies and ideas by the enterprise?
Absolutely. There's the realization that if corporations and these organizations are not looking into the startup and scale-up ecosystem for solutions, they're missing part of the universe of potential solutions, and actually part of the universe that's among the most innovative. And so most of them, are coming to realize that they need to have specific ways to engage with these organizations. They're not the typical providers they're used to work with, and so they're developing ways to do that, in different manners. But there's definitely an increased appetite to work with organizations, although granted, usually more scale-ups and rather than startups.
Mm-hmm. There is one question from the audience. So do you see the legislation catching up with all of these trends? The gig economy already kind of in some of the jurisdictions like US, UK kind of caused some trouble, and the legislators are trying to catch up. But do you feel like EU is trying to grasp that in some way and unlock the power of gig and human cloud?
I think definitely I see the EU trying to catch up with that. As usual, the market goes ahead of the regulation. I think the purpose of the regulation is trying to reconcile, let's say, labor rights, which obviously is something that regulators need to take into account, with actually enabling something that they understand, that I think legislators and regulators understand that is necessary for innovation and this sort of development to happen. So it's definitely something that's in the agenda of the EU, that's been under discussion, and how that will be translated into local legislations might take a little bit longer than that, but yeah, it's definitely in the agenda.
Thank you. We'll move on, and we'll come back to the issue of what this tech talent gap means and actually how it may impact the ecosystem, just so you can brace yourself for what is ahead of us coming up. But before we get there, I wanted to pass it over to Barry to talk about actually what open talent economy is and what human cloud is doing within it.
Great, thank you, Przemek, and thank you, Carlos. A great presentation. So yeah, good afternoon. My name is Barry Matthews. I'm the founder of Resource. We're a consulting company that helps organizations implement blended workforce models and workforce ecosystems that embrace the human cloud. So our job is to help businesses to take an open mindset of talent and what we call open talent, and take an open-minded approach to how they access talent to match demand for talent in their enterprise with the right source of supply. And for a global enterprise, that source of talent supply is likely to come from a variety of different places. It's obviously going to come from their employees, and they have to balance the work that goes to their employees alongside independent freelance contractors, which may come direct or may come from MSPs. They have to balance that alongside management consultancies, alongside outsourcing companies, and as Carlos said, alongside robots and robotic process automation and automated processes. So our job is to help organizations to achieve that balance of supply and demand, because if you can get that balance right, it can unlock incredible efficiencies in terms of speed to access and productivity when you're working with an ecosystem. So we help with that blended workforce and ecosystem strategy, business case, operating model, process refinement, sourcing the right suppliers, and then doing the change management to make sure that it works in a global enterprise. So ultimately being the trusted advisors to guide our clients by the hand through what is an incredibly rapidly changing and complex area all around the future of work.
I can already ask the first question that popped up over here from the audience, which is how do you explain this to your manager? So I'll ask a side question to that. Do you help in explaining that to the manager? Like, is this part of what you're consulting on as well, like building a business case for the human cloud?
Absolutely. Part of what we do is sort of education and evangelism, really, to say, we've been thinking about accessing talent in the same ways for so many years, and we now have to think slightly differently. We have to unlearn what we've learned and realize that there are a variety of different options. And part of the time that's convincing managers who've been working in a certain way that there's new possibilities, and it doesn't have to be a threat. It can be a real opportunity to make you more productive. So quite a lot of what we do is around change management and taking people on a journey. Oh, sorry, I've gone. There we go. So I've been in the consulting around operational efficiency for the last 20 years or so. and started out in outsourcing and offshoring, and we still do quite a lot of consulting around that. And that was a fantastic, and still is a fantastic lever for delivering operational efficiency. I've worked quite a lot in shared services and global business services, setting up centers to deliver efficiency using people and technology. I've run consultancies which deliver robotic process automation, enabling organizations to do things better, faster, cheaper. I've run businesses helping organizations to implement digital transformation, much overused term, but to think digitally. And now we're helping organizations to do those other four alongside open talent. And I would say that with open talent and workforce ecosystems, the same techniques apply to open talent as they do to those previous four. You need an enterprise strategy to be effective. You need executive sponsorship. It needs a new operating model. It needs new and different technology. It can deliver incredible data if you know how to set it up and collect it. But it does, just as we've just said, require a new way of thinking, and it requires change. So when it's thought through properly and done at scale, it can be incredibly productive, have real efficiency benefits. And if we think about what's happened over the last 12 months, you know, a light bulb has gone on for many organizations. We've changed the way we think about knowledge work. You know, within a matter of weeks this time last year, or certainly in March last year, hundreds of millions of knowledge workers moved to remote first ways of working. And many will obviously never go back to working in the same way. Some will, but many won't. You know, the concept of work being somewhere you go, I'm off to work, I'll see you later, is now, it just doesn't make sense for so many knowledge workers. Work is something we do, and we'll have many careers over our lifetime. But companies had a sort of light bulb moment. They realized that the skills and the talent that they need to support their business previously needed to be geographically based, relatively close to where their office were, well, their head office, be that in London or in Silicon Valley or in Munich or wherever. And they suddenly realized, well, if we break that link between geographical proximity and our office, we've suddenly got a huge pool of hundreds of millions of talented resources that we can pull from. And the way we can access them is via digital platforms and marketplaces, and increasingly the human cloud. You know, work changed forever last year, and it will never go back to the way it was before. And as a result of that, we're seeing entire industries be disrupted. And disrupted doesn't mean replaced. Disrupted just means changed. You know, we're seeing recruitment be changed. It was always going through a big change anyway, and it's now going through an even greater change. If you can go to a digital marketplace and access the type of skills that you need on a project or a freelance basis, or even on a full-time basis using a digital platform with all of the data and transparency being matched using AI to candidates immediately, it's going to disrupt the way you might traditionally have gone to an agency. If you can access consultants via the human cloud just for the project that you need, and you can get teams of them or individuals at the click of a button, it's going to change the way you use traditional consultancies. And if you can get, you know, teams of hundreds, in fact, even thousands of people via a marketplace and a curated cloud crowd of people, let's say software developers, and again, you can do that at the click of a button, it's going to change the way you use outsourcing providers. So it's disrupting those three industries, but it's not replacing them. But we are seeing supplementing them and augmenting them. And interestingly, we're seeing each of those three industries using the human cloud themselves to change the way they deliver services for their clients. And what we see when we go into enterprises is organizations grappling with this, what I call the talent balance. And I created this simple sort of seesaw diagram. Because if you think enterprises are trying to get those balls on the top to balance, they want resilience, they want speed, right? They don't want to wait months to access talent. They want it immediately, just like the way they access, or we all access things as consumers. We want quality, and we want things at the right level of cost. So we're trying to balance those four balls, and there are probably more, but they're four of the most important ones. And we have ways of getting things done. We have choices as enterprises. We can choose to get our employees to do things for us. As I said at the beginning, we can use contractors, we can use agencies, we can use outsourcers, consultancies, we can use the human cloud. And the key is getting that balance right. If you can get that talent balance right across that entire ecosystem, then you can deliver things really productively. Whether you augment, whether you replace over time, whether you add robots and AI and technology into the mix, as it shows on the left, all of that is what we try to help organizations with. Now, a few things that we are seeing in the marketplace as we go and talk to enterprises. The first is that we're seeing the human cloud marketplace growing incredibly quickly. So there are a lot of marketplaces, human cloud marketplaces or platforms in the market. There are around 350 or so, depending on how you count them. There are apparently about two new ones every week. So it's a very, very busy market. But the three listed marketplaces, you can see their revenue, which is Upwork, freelancer.com and Fiverr. They've seen incredible growth over the last 12 months, as you would expect. And there's a quote there from Upwork. They're still only around a $300 million business, but they are growing at 33% a year. And the fourth quarter last year was their biggest quarter so far. Their chief exec believes they've got a $1 trillion addressable market. And the others are seeing significant growth. Freelancer have got 50 million people on their platform now and growing significantly. And so we're going to see more and more growth from these big platforms, and you'll see more and more of them become household names, and we'll see M&A activity in this part of the industry. The other thing we're seeing is that the human cloud is increasingly being used for highly skilled talent. We often have the gig economy term used, and people assume the gig economy means sort of almost high volume, low quality, and we're seeing a change in that. And terms like the human cloud and open talent and ecosystems, so that we have almost like a better connotation with the use of freelance platforms. But what we are seeing is increasingly software development, data science, financial analysts, marketing, even interim finance directors, or even chief execs. There is a real market for increasingly highly skilled talent on platforms. They are now a viable alternative, and we'll continue to see that over the next months and years. The other thing we're seeing in the market are the large human cloud platforms becoming what we call enterprise ready. So they're not just platforms where you can go onto an Upwork or a freelancer.com and use your credit card, of course, but for large scale enterprises, you need to think of platforms as supplier alternatives. We need purchase orders, we need the right invoicing terms, and of course you need to protect IP and data and GDPR and security. You need account management and client managers if you're putting millions of dollars through platforms. And so platforms, marketplaces, human cloud, this is Topcoder as an example, are becoming more and more enterprise ready, and so enterprises are then becoming more confident to use them. The other thing we're seeing is professional services firms embracing them, whether it's EY with Gig Now, or PwC with Talent Exchange, or Accenture's, or Deloitte's got Pixel, and Deloitte are using freelancer.com, as you can see here, for their own internal needs. And they've got a relationship with a company called Expify to get data scientists and AI engineers. We're seeing a more and more use of human cloud platforms for consultancies to access the talent they need to then provide to their clients. And I think you'll continue to see that as a common trend. And then the other thing we're seeing is a blurring of the lines between all forms of professional services and the human cloud. I think there will only be the human cloud at some point in time. It will be the way we work. I can't envisage businesses in the future not using digital technology to link supply and demand of human talent. But as you've got here an example from Upwork, if I can get that many software developers screened, checked for everything, trained in a cloud, accessed at the click of a button, or in 4 days at least, as opposed to 16 days, at a very, very attractive price point, and I'm able to control time, quality, cost, the things that are really important to clients, then why would I use any other form of professional services model? And so we'll see a blurring of the lines between when we use consultants, as I say, or outsourcers, or any form of services company, and when we use platforms, and the two will continue to merge. So finally, Bill Joy, who you may have heard of, who was very famously co-founded Sun Microsystems, very famously came up with Joy's law many years ago, which says no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. If you're Microsoft, they'll probably work for Apple. If you're in Shoreditch, they'll be in Silicon Valley. So no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. And I believe it's time that law has lived its life, and it's time for a new law. And so I've created, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but Matthew's Law, which is no matter who you are, many of the smartest people in the world are available on demand and able to work for you at the click of a button right now through the human cloud.
All right. Thank you for that. I think we have a couple of questions that the audience ask.
Sure.
So in the simple terms, how would you define the human cloud, Barry? If you were to explain that to someone like in an elevator kind of ride.
Yeah, sure. So the human cloud is the use of digital technology to link supply and demand. It's like a Google for people skills. So, for whatever you want, whether you want to use an Uber or a Lyft, or to access skills on Upwork, Fiverr, or Topcoder, using digital technology to match the supply and demand of human labor. And
then the top 3 arguments for the manager to actually embrace it or consider this, what would you say would that be?
So the first one is access to skills. So using the human cloud, you can access skills incredibly quickly. So the first one would be speed. And when we're helping organizations, some of the companies we work with have got 5 or 10, 20,000 open positions that they can't fill by traditional means. When we open their eyes to what's possible with the human cloud, they can fill those positions within days, if not, within weeks, if not days. And so if you do it properly, speed is the first. Second, I'd say, is talent, just being able to access the type of skills which are scarce in your geographical region, but they're actually available on other parts of the world, and you can access them digitally. So scarce talent availability. And then the third is transparency. On the human cloud, you can see, let's say you're looking for a software engineer, you can see where they've worked in the human cloud, how much money they've earned, what the feedback has been, and how much the star rating has been. You can see their portfolio of services. Compare that to traditional recruitment, when you could probably just see a paper-based CV. So it's the transparency of data is probably a third benefit.
And a question from Sunil, when you have a customer who has this priority or a policy to hire rather full-time hires, how do you build a case for, having more gig or contractor talent?
I mean, I would say it depends what it is. And there are some things that a full-time employee is going to be probably better suited to. The more senior up the organization, I would want my strategy and by my senior managers who are going to be part of my organization, or I might want my line management and program management to always be full-time people. But if I want something that has a project base, a shelf life, a finite time, an endpoint, rather than looking at, let's say, outsourcing or consultancy, I might well look at the human cloud. If I want to try something, I don't necessarily want to employ 10 data scientists, but I've got a load of data science activity. Maybe I'll try that in the human cloud, see if it works, and then decide I might hire 2 of them and then use 8 from the cloud to turn on and turn off, to take a consumption-based model like we do with technology. So I'd say it's not a nirvana for everything, but for roles that have a lifetime, are finite or require specialist skills, you want to try something, it's a brilliant alternative.
And the last one from Romain, who's asking about the notion that you've mentioned, which is that COVID pushed companies to basically open up their talent market and make it global. Do you see that trend of hiring in the 30-mile radius coming back at some point as we start recovering from COVID?
To a certain extent, but not much. So I think, light bulb moments, we've realized that people don't need to be in the same country as us, and they can still deliver effectively. I think that will continue, and we'll see. And we are seeing with organizations, they're looking for for freelancers via human cloud platforms in low-cost locations. However, there will be some things, of course, where we need to do some element of face-to-face. And so it may be, we can, I think we will always be more efficient face-to-face for some tasks. And so there might be some element of increased use of geographical, local expertise. But I don't think we'll reverse this trend we're seeing of it being able to access talent from anywhere in the world.
There is one more, and then we'll move on to the next section and maybe cover the rest in the Q&A. But do you have any recommendations for like a minimal infrastructure to embrace the human cloud? Meaning, like, is there like a typical setup? Like, do you need to have a team leader or some physical space? What would you be your typical recommendation for a client?
Yeah, I would say, it's a bit of a cliche, but think big, start small, scale fast. And so to start with, you don't really need any real infrastructure. We're helping our organizations start now by taking somebody who happens to be in HR, introducing them to the different platforms, teaching them how they work, and getting them to fulfill some needs so that they learn quickly. Once they've learned, they then can start to build out the processes and the operating model to expand. But to start, it really doesn't take take much. But I would say give it to somebody in your organization who's responsible for talent, typically within HR. Give them responsibility for it, potentially as a full-time task, and then build around them. So get your champion internally and then build around it. But you don't need a lot to start, of course.
Awesome. Thank you, Barry. So let me then take over and speak a bit on how actually we see some of our clients applying the human cloud in practice, and brought more of a hands-on observations of how this works and where the market is heading. So I wanted to build on the notion that Carlos mentioned in his slides, and this data point from Microsoft, 149 million new digital jobs by 2025. Now, we need to put it in the perspective. Prior COVID, the so-called tech talent gap was estimated roughly at 9 million vacancies, right? It is about to 17-fold in the next few years to come, right? So if you think about your traditional talent acquisition models, we believe fundamentally that they will no longer be able to fill that demand. Why? Because the supply of talent is growing only so steadily around the globe, right? The amount of graduates entering the labor market allows us to grow the pie, but anywhere between 4 to 5% year over year. Yes, there are some programs to try to attempt to reskill bigger kind of populations of people, but still that gap is growing to be extremely big. And coming back to the question from the audience, like, how do you convince the client to stop thinking about full-time hires? We probably need to start with this chart and say, like, for hiring a full-time talent in the near future is going to be luxury, right? Because not everyone will be able not only to afford, but also to find that talent. And we actually see that trouble already on the horizon. Like, I subscribe to what has been shared by the other panelists. COVID really catalyzed this notion of embracing the human cloud. And what we have observed in our business is unprecedented. The demand and the interest we've had for our model and services in the first quarter of this year. And you can clearly see it, like, with your eyes, if you just look at some of the largest consulting and IT companies out there, how many open job vacancies they have on their own sites or on LinkedIn. It's not in hundreds as it used to be, it's in thousands. Literally, there are hundreds of thousands open jobs across just the bigger players, right? And the trillion-dollar opportunity that Upwork was referring to, this is in fact the value of the global IT services market, estimated by Gartner for 2021. Out of this trillion-dollar pie, 20 companies, some of them included on this chart, capture about 26%, right? But the rest of this pie, so 74% of the $1 trillion, is shared across over 300,000 small and medium-sized companies. So the battle for talent is already huge, and it's going to get even more intense. So before I switch into some of the ideas on how we are addressing the challenges that are ahead of us and how human cloud can actually be helpful and what we should consider to embrace human cloud within your organization, we wanted to run a quick poll to see where your organizations stand. So you should see the poll on your screen. And there are two questions, one with a single answer So how serious is the tech talent gap problem for your organization? And the second is whether over the next 12 months, are you considering actually considering using some new of the solutions that, or which of the solutions you're going to use to actually try to close that gap. So let's give it a minute for everyone to have a choice to vote. So give it 30 more seconds. There are answers coming in. We have more than half of the audience already voted. Thank you for that. All right, so let's look at the results. So as you can see, the issue of the tech talent gap is in the range of critical to concerning for a vast majority of the participants in today's webinar, right? Close to 70% of the audience actually believes that it falls in the high criticality list. Only a few are doing actually quite well, or they don't hire tech staff at all. We have a bit more equal distribution when it comes to how organizations are going to close that. So we see some of those more traditional models, such as temporary staffing or IT outsourcing. There are a few who are looking actually in embracing the human cloud. So 15 out of the 38 companies that voted. Investments into HR solutions to actually speed up the process and also intensifying the recruitment efforts. So thank you very much for that. I think this shows you kind of where we are and when it comes to the adoption curve of some of these modern solutions. So let me explain a bit more on how we see what is happening on the market, right? So, in the marketplace where we have over demand and the limited supply and a supply that is only growing so steadily, right? The market doesn't have so-called equilibrium, right? And this comes from purely macroeconomics. And this is exactly how it works in the real world. So one of the ways in which market is trying to find the equilibrium is actually by increasing the price of that limited and precious asset. In that case, it's the digital talent. And this is what we see firsthand in the markets where Talent Alpha operates. So we are working with companies from over 30 countries, and we see that the boundaries of around the globe just dropped. Talent is being recruited from everywhere, and the prices begin to catch up. So what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is actually a screenshot from a Polish job ads portal that lists jobs for Polish developers, right? But what is interesting about the chart is the monthly salaries that they are being offered, right? Expressed in the US dollars. This is Silicon Valley level salaries, right? Where a developer, whether they sit in Warsaw, Krakow, or Gdańsk, can get not even changing their location. Something that about a year ago was not even thought of, right? Or very few could think about switching their careers and actually getting one of these jobs. Because this notion of not having talent to work from the HQ or from the 30-mile radius from the office, we can see the market trying to find the equilibrium through increasing the price. Yet another method, and this is how you can try to balance that out, is to basically expand your talent pool, right? So you can basically catch up with the others and try to find ways on how your approach to total talent management can be more flexible, right? With all of these shifts, one of the ways to do that is to try to tap into some of those pockets, and the human cloud is one of the solutions that you would highly encourage you to consider to close that gap. So there was a question how you define the human cloud, and this is a definition that kind of comes from various of sources, some of the industry analysts, some of that has been written by us. But the way we define the Talent Alpha, the human cloud, is as an ecosystem of people and their capabilities, right? So we look just way much deeper than just the individuals and their roles, but we try to capture them and describe them on their capabilities level that are available to you both within your organization as well as the outside. Now, what we find working with many of the organizations today is that they have very little understanding of what skill set is already available within the organization. So the stuff that they have in their buildings or now working remote that possess, not talking about the skills that are available to them outside. So human cloud should actually allow organizations to look at the total workforce, including full-time hires, including outsourced staff, contractors, and gig talent kind of holistically. And the human cloud also facilitates kind of the transactions and the matches between the different participants of the ecosystem by combination of technologies, online platforms, and work intermediation models, meaning kind of legal frameworks behind it, basically giving your organization an on-demand access to talent, helping you to get the job done. And this is the big kind of shift that we believe is going to happen on the market. Whereas before companies were trying to hire for specific roles, we believe that more and more companies will start hiring to get a specific job done, right? And that will be a very interesting shift that we already see happening. So one of the features of the Talent Alpha Human Cloud is what we call the Enterprise Gateway Marketplace. This is actually, where we started our business 2.5 years ago, and this is where we've seen great adoption over the past few quarters, where we are connecting on the demand side large enterprises or companies that have a big demand for technical talent, and within those large enterprises, typically there are tens of hundreds of internal buyers, and through our platform, they can find and browse through a growing ecosystem of the supply side. On the supply side in the Enterprise Gateway Marketplace, we don't have individual freelance talent. We have small and medium-sized IT firms that specialize in providing IT services. So our ecosystem already offers you to get access to over 20,000 qualified software professionals scattered across over 350 companies located in 30 countries. And the platform allows you not only to find the right match, but also provides kind of the legal framework or legal highway to conduct these transactions fast. So if one of our clients wants to hire a talent from the ecosystem, we can do it very quickly compared to the traditional methods of going through a recruitment firm or an outsourcing partner, because we already have the master services agreement in place. We understand who's available at a given vendor. We can quickly find the match and deploy that person to work for you. So this is just an animation of how large our network is, and it is growing really on the daily basis. You can see how many countries are being present. We have organic growth and interest in our solution from Latin America and in India. We started out of Central and Eastern Europe, as you can see, over 30 countries across various of technical roles, right? So it's the commodity roles like Java developers or Q8 or front-end developers, but there is a variety of very specific and niche roles, including Pega developers, including penetration testing experts, etc. And this is one of the great benefits of the Human Cloud. It really allows you to access the kind of breadth and depth of that talent. What is also interesting is that the clients that we work with, and because of our underlying model, this Enterprise Gateway Marketplace, they tend to consider this solution for a bit longer term assignments, right? Whereas in more gig economy or freelance economy, those assignments tend to be short term, sometimes in hours, days, or weeks. In our case, average kind of assignment duration is 6 months. Some of them go for as many as 24 months, pretty much resembling more of a full-time hire or an outsourcing partner engagement. So how does this work? Well, it starts with actually contracting with us. We need to sign a master services agreement, but then we need to get deep into understanding your needs. Really, who do you need to get this job done? And we have models and tools to help you define what we call the dream candidate. So what is the composition of skills, both technical as well as soft skills, for this ideal person required to do the job? Then we do the search. There are a number of ways in which you can do that. You can do a self-search. We also provide for a concierge service when our consultants would be actually working with you to take you through these steps to present you with a short list of algorithm. We also have some tools and algorithms doing the shortlisting. But then, when it comes to selecting the right person for the job, still, the part of the traditional recruitment process on your end is typically happening, where the hiring manager really wants to see and meet that person via video conference, interview them and dispatch them to get the job done. So the key is actually to understand who we want to hire. And this is where our platform actually goes really in depth of identifying the skills of the participants of the ecosystem and then codifying them using what we call the talent genome. Talent genome is a construct and a data model that we've built that allows us to not only identify what technical skills one might have, but also collect additional insights about how strong these technical skills are. But we go way beyond it and trying to measure where possible cognitive abilities such as working memory or perceptual speed. This is also where we are using some psychological tools such as creative behavior questionnaire to understand whether one is more of a creative or heuristic thinker. That's also where we can capture their personality traits. In the end, we are getting actually very good understanding first of your organization, and then out of that data on who we should bring into this organization to complement them well. And as I already mentioned, the search happens through either self-service, where you can browse through the inventory of talent available in the platform, or we can provide you with that concierge service to find you the perfect match. But we can actually look through all of this data that is available to you to really shorten that typical recruitment process and make up your mind very early on whether this person has a potential to be a good fit for the role or not. Now, the one remark I wanted to make here is that we anonymize all of this data. So as you go through the search process, you don't know who the individual on the other end is. This is how we also remove the bias from the equation. So no gender or race information is being shared. You don't also see who the provider is at that stage. This is revealed farther down the matching process. So when it comes to building the engagement, there are quite a few interesting differences between the classic recruitment process and the human cloud. In the kind of classic process, candidates are typically selected by the human, right, based on the CVs, which is on its own a fairly bias-prone process. In this case, it's the algorithms that are capable of finding the closest proximity to what you're looking for. Also, when you have a much bigger data set to work with. Whereas in the classic CV, you would typically have anywhere between 20 to 30 data points that are relevant for the search. In our case, the profiles tend to have 500 plus points to be covered. In a traditional recruitment process, you typically go through a number of gates where you have like recruiter screening and HR screening and a number of technical interviews. In the human cloud approach, typically that process is being reduced because a lot of data has been collected and validated for you prior making that decision. There is, again, a high probability of bias in the traditional process, where in many platforms the bias is being removed because you are comparing apples to apples and looking at data through the lens of standard taxonomies and measurements methods. And again, in the classic recruitment process, very rarely you would go beyond just a technical assessment, and very few companies have already embraced like doing psychometrics measurements, and this is what our platform provides out of the box. We have a couple of clients, and happy to share with you some case studies of clients who have already embraced that model. As you can see, we've been able to close quite difficult roles in a very short time. And we are talking from the moment the client engaged us for the job to the moment that the talent was available to do the work, which based on what we saw is on par with the other talent platforms. And also when it comes to the efficiency of the process itself, our clients tend to see a lot of improvement. But in order to embrace the human cloud, organizations really need to shift their minds, right? And I think this speaks back to the question, how do I build a business case for my manager, right? So you need to think in terms of, the benefits and also addressing some of the challenges, right, that you might have. So we have a couple of hints kind of across that process that we see. First, when it comes to the preparation, right? Often case organizations would not have appropriate frameworks and a long procurement process. This is where we recommend either going through some innovation division, because they typically would have a shortcut through those procurement gates, or hiring a guy like Barry so they can advise you on how to do that quickly. And then when it comes to defining the needs, we can help you actually facilitate workshops to build those definitions of the candidates you want to bring into your organization. Then when it comes to the search, right, we would encourage you to actually open your minds and start looking for candidates from kind of the markets where you wouldn't typically recruit from. Our platform is available, for example, in Macedonia, where there is quite a lot of very qualified technical talent, typically a country that would not pop on your location list. And then when it comes to finding the right candidates, this is actually where quite a bit of work needs to be required, and probably some cultural change as well, because we find, hiring managers looking at the human cloud talent kind of through the classic lens, and they ask them about, where they want to be in the next 5 years, and, they want to make sure there is a good cultural fit. So this is where a bit of a work would be required, by all of us to shift their minds so they can embrace this more on and off on-demand model. And then last but not least, we encourage you to look at how the process itself could be shortened, right? Maybe you can reduce the number of interviews for the human cloud talent. Maybe you don't have to have 4 hiring managers being involved in that. And we also see that the more quality input you give in the beginning of that process, then more success you might likely see at the end. And I will, before we open it up for the rest of the questions, I wanted to just share the last thought that 90% of companies that were surveyed see basically a competitive advantage in shifting their talent model to a blend, right? So it's not that you need to just embrace the human cloud. I think the recommendation is, look at the total workforce, right? Look what percentage of your workforce should be full-time talent, what percentage of your workforce should be, your trusted outsourcing partners, and how much of that talent pool can come from elsewhere, which is where the human cloud comes to help you. So with that, let me take a look at some of the questions. So one of them was for me. What feedback do we get from the procurement officers from the corporates? So we get mixed feelings, and this pretty much depends on where the companies are kind of on the adoption curve. Some of them are flag wavers within the organizations, and they are telling their organizations, we need to adopt the human cloud because otherwise we would have problems to grow. Others are not so convinced, right? I think this is more kind of the laggards on the market. Eventually, as you saw in the stats, that we believe that they will be forced to close that gap. Barry, I think there is one question for you, which is how do you deal with the repetitive onboarding costs? So as you bring the gig talent, are there any good practices to actually optimize the onboarding process?
I mean, compared to traditional models, the onboarding cost is very, very low. But yeah, if you've got a repetitive task and you want to use a human cloud platform for it, then you can set up standard checks, standard screening process, standard training. You can have a crowd of people available as and when you need them that are pre-screened. So various things that you can do to make it as slick and as frictionless as possible.
Yep. Okay. There was a question about how this can be linked to certifications and assessment on the supply side. I can explain on how we do this. So because of our enterprise gateway model, we tap into existing organizations. So all of the talent that is already hired there has been vetted, right? So they go through their own recruitment process. We also try to standardize some of the ways we describe those different competencies. But there is always a process. In that process, there is a calibrating step where the manager of that team, division, organization is looking at the composition of their profiles to ensure that the quality data goes into the cloud. And there is one more from Aneta, which is how do we get the specialists into the human cloud? So again, in our model, in our case, we are dealing with so-called software houses or SME IT companies. They deal with attracting talent to them. So for us, it's rather easy to grow the ecosystem. I believe it's a bit more difficult in the freelance platforms because they need to kind of build up their ecosystem on the ongoing basis. Now, there are a few more questions, which I suggest we answer probably over text because we are right at the hour. So there's quite a lot of engagement from the audience, which I really appreciate. Gentlemen, Carlos, Barry, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Dear audience, thank you for all of the great questions. We're looking forward to continuing this dialogue for you. Here are our contact details. Shall you wanted to get in touch with us over email or LinkedIn. And I wish you a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.